larger narrative, and I think it's important to frame it in that, so you'll understand where I will eventually lead to, which is Guyana. And you referred to the division and occupation of Cyprus, and in fact my desire for Nostos, or homecoming, was never realized. And then in 1974, I was, my father said, let's go back together. So this was a kind of a chance for his redemption. Now what happened in 1974 was the, also, besides the Turkish war with Cyprus, was also the revolution in Portugal. And being a leftist and struggling for democracy in the Mediterranean, I said to my father, let's defer the trip to Cyprus. I want to go to Portugal for the summer to celebrate the revolution. And as I was in Portugal, the news of the coup in Cyprus and the Turkish invasion happened. So in fact, the trip was cancelled, and my father, in a sense, felt redeemed because he sort of saved me for a war by having taken me to another digression. So this was another digression for me. But but I was still determined to go back. But my first return was in '77, and the division and the whole place was so depressing. This homecoming was not a homecoming. I just wanted to go somewhere else. And because I knew Portuguese, I thought, well, maybe I should go to Brazil. And instead of going to Brazil, I found a job teaching Portuguese in Guyana. And that's when I met David. We were talking last night how we met 30 years ago. I was getting ready for Guyana, and his wife saw me reading a book on the train. So in a sense, I see that as my second Odyssey. And I want to frame all of this, because what I will, eventually I want to show some DVDs of fieldwork in Guyana. So I want you to get a sense of how all this fills into the larger narrative of my interest in translation. So, I mean, in a sense then, cosmopolitanism has always interested me as an idea. But obviously this is it's one of these new terms that critical theory has now put attention to. And not least due to the impact of globalization. And because cosmopolitanism concerns processes of self-transformation in which new cultural forms take shape, where new spaces of discourse open up, leading to a transformation in the social world. And the cosmopolitan imagination tries to capture the transformative moment, interactive relationships between societies and modernities, the developmental and dialogic, and the assumption that culture contains capacities for learning, and that societies have developmental possibilities. Nonetheless, it's a highly charged and controversial term. And Janet Lyon, in her review of Rebecca Valkovitz's book, Cosmopolitan Style, Modernism Beyond the Nation, summarizes the different views in an interesting way, and says that some people see it as an elaborate ruse for US cultural domination, the leading edge of imperialism, nationalism in sheep's clothing. Some people defend it against wolfish nationalism. It justifies cities of refuge in a world of refugees. Or it is a disciplined, self-reflexive praxis of mutual recognition in a world increasingly populated by Homo sacer. It is a zone of salutary contact. It is an avant-garde unto itself. And it is consumption that changes you from inside. It is consumption that reinforces your limited worldview. It's aesthetics, it's a museum, it's ethics, or it's just bullshit. And nonetheless, despite all these views, I think there's a tradition of critical cosmopolitanism emerging. One of the main adherents and a thinker I find particularly interesting is Walter Mignolo, who talks about critical cosmopolitanism and border thinking, and has modified the term and distinguishes between cosmopolitanism and global designs, and between cosmopolitan projects and critical cosmopolitanism. And here I think is where the border thinking is very important. In the sense that in the border is the actual crossing, it's the moment of crossing, and the tension in the crossing that links it to translation and transculturation. Critical cosmopolitan wants to differentiate the assumptions of a world republic, or on elites, or on the Eurocentric universalism of the Enlightenment. And so current theory is moving towards a post-universalistic cosmopolitanism that recognizes different kinds of modernity and processes of societal transformation that do not presuppose a separation of social from the political or postulate a single world culture. I mean, yes, there was very much taken up by your preoccupation with the word static, and it reminded me of Michel Serres' use of the word static, but as noise. And I think this is a good example also of one way of troping critical cosmopolitanism, in the sense that the noise of the world is what's been excluded, but it remains there as static, and it keeps coming back to you, and therefore it denies this kind of progressive linear development. So it's finding the static in the world, finding what we normally don't hear, that can create an openness through which societies undergo transformation. And I think my own engagement, I think looking back at my own literary studies in the 70s at Cardiff, there was probably literary studies was very different then and dominated by the English middle classes. There was probably 3 of us. There was a Goan, who was in fact an East African Goan that was displaced, and there was to England, there was someone from St. Vincent and myself in the Faculty of Arts, and we immediately found each other. We were kind of like a marginal group in the humanities, and besides coming from small unknown places and not being able to answer where we were from in an easy way, we all had an interest in Portuguese. And this is, and perhaps it was because English had not then, even though it was a global language, it had not yet embraced the other continents, whereas Portuguese studies was already embraced. It had several continents. So for us, it was a kind of a point of exit. And in a sense, this is why my own direction moved away from English into those areas. And in a sense, this is why I found a space in academia. I think if English had became English, I wouldn't have stayed in English, but it was this comparativist dimension. And I'm looking for delinquent theorists or delinquent philosophers that take you horizontally into different dimensions. Nonetheless, even with the new theory, new hegemonies and orthodoxies arise as we move to a new canon and a new world order that brings with it new forces of singularity, homogenization, technological rationality, and an increasingly global experience in supranational states. And this brings new challenges for the transcultural. And the idea of transculturation designates a space where diverse forces and influences cross that may derive from the nation state, they may derive from nature, or the market, or forces of the market. There are disorderly flows of influences caught between state regulation or cultural design. And so in that respect, the way we use transculturation, it could be either celebrated or condemned. I mean, we don't know which direction this process is going to take us. It may impose closure and fix identity. It may declare the nation state inadequate to that identity, or remain open and fixed, or it may establish a flow between diverse groups. I think the original term of the word, and again this is what took me to Caribbean and Latin America is it was first coined by Fernando Ortiz,